G'day, welcome to Navadia. This week I'd hoped to talk about something fun and exciting and sciencey because holy shit, the world has gone to hell. But unfortunately, this video is time sensitive and I really wanted to talk about it. It's come out that a family vlogger called Myka Schauffer and her husband have recently rehomed their adopted autistic child. I will not say his name because I think it's unethical, even though it is plastered all over the internet because his parents are assholes. I will not contribute to potential future public humiliation. First of all, I will make myself very, very clear. I have zero idea who these people are. I was originally researching some science topics to talk about and I have wasted a lot of time looking at horror at the hellhole that is America right now, so I'm quite behind on my weekly YouTube routine. This isn't the most well-researched video I have put out there. I have left a link to Rachel Oates' video which kicked me up the arse to do this one. I'm also going to comment on some of the stuff that she's dug up. I am only responding to a response video, so yeah, definitely do not take my word on this as God about these people. Please do your own research and come to your own conclusions. First thoughts. I didn't know Myka's husband's name until I saw the reverse adoption video. Yes, she is a family vlogger and got her fame under her brand and name, but her husband is, in my opinion, just as much at fault. And yet, all of the hate is directed at her. Is that misogyny? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. Okay, I have a lot to say about their reverse adoption video, and I want to make it clear that I will give them the benefit of the doubt. They say they loved him, and I will believe that. And they wanted to give him the best chance at living a better life. I also believe that, despite the fact they've potentially ruined his life by putting all of his autistic struggles online, including their excuse for rehoming him, because that's not going to screw with his head at all when he's older. They also talked about getting him to medical professionals and therapists. I believe that, but when and to what extent did they follow through on the advice given in those appointments? They also said they weren't given accurate information about his disabilities before they adopted him. I believe that as well. When they say that this has broken their heart, it is pretty clear they appear to be upset, so I believe that too. But I kind of wonder if they're upset about losing him or the money he brings into the household. I'm sorry I'm being a bit snarky, but seriously, this week has been fucked. But when they said they wanted to protect his privacy, I absolutely do not believe them at all. They paraded him around on YouTube, Instagram, and other social media. He was a toddler. He couldn't consent. They betrayed his future trust. They told the whole world about his medical conditions. They wanted to protect his privacy? Oh, fuck off. They mentioned in their reverse adoption video that they didn't know what to say legally. They were covering their asses. Again, fuck off. When Myka says she feels 500% like a failure as a mum, I have two things to say. First one, it's okay to struggle and fail, and it's perfectly okay to admit to struggling. Reach out to your fans for some guidance and advice. If you were as transparent as you said you wanted to appear, you would have got on a lot sooner and said, I'm struggling and I need some help. This situation hurts deeply and I don't know what to do. But you didn't. You made your life out to be sunshine and rainbows, and it required pressure from your fans to explain what you did with your son. Second of all, does your husband feel 500% like a failure as a dad? Or is the guilt only on you? This is an awkward situation. The poor kid was not in a healthy environment. Even the most affluent, wealthy people can have struggles as parents. And that is fine. And a lot of people are saying that uprooting him again will cause even more trauma. While this is true, this is also where I kind of diverged from mainstream thinking. Yes, it would cause him a lot more trauma, but being kept in an abusive household would have been potentially a lot worse. Although I am not a child psychologist, so I'm just putting my uninformed opinions out there. So I am very possibly quite wrong. For those who don't know, I work with people who have a disability and have been for about 7 years. I've worked only with adults and not children, so my thoughts and opinions on this situation will be coloured by this fact as we are talking about a child. In my time in the field, there has been a lot of growth in Australia in regards to how we see people with disabilities. For example, in 2013, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, or NDIS, passed in Parliament. It was basically a publicly funded pool to give people with a disability more choice in their care and provider. There has been a whole heap of teething problems with it and some massive bungles and controversies, but overall, it's been reasonably successful. One of the things they brought in was funding changes. Before it was introduced, funding disabilities was more localised. If someone lived in rural Australia, they might have funding for mobility aids, incontinence aids, hydrotherapy, animal therapy, social activities, and respite housing. If their parents started to get old and needed to move to the city, this person would move outside of their local jurisdiction and they would have to reapply for that funding. Since there were different funding pools in different areas, they may have lost funding for animal therapy, and because of that, they started to withdraw and the overall health declined. Since the NDIS is Australia-wide, people are able to keep their funding even after moving, so that person will have been able to keep their animal therapy. By the way, that person was a pure hypothetical. I'm not describing anyone I personally know. I have heard of and met people who have lost funding since the NDIS has come in, or whose case managers have never worked a day in disabilities, and other horror stories. Some of those people were killed by their support workers, but that's a different conversation for another day. But from what I've seen, it's been a net positive for people who have a disability in Australia. The whole idea of the NDIS is to put the power of choice in the hands of the people who will be using these services. So why am I telling you this? I'm giving a bit of background on where my thoughts come from and the paradigm shift that Australia has undergone in the last 7 years in the disability sector. I'm also going to explain why I think they did the best for him, but I'm not going to excuse what they did because, frankly, putting his life story up on the internet for clicks, sponsorship deals, and ad revenue is enough evidence for me that he is not in a healthy environment. In Rachel's video, she points to several pieces of evidence strongly suggesting his autonomy was ignored. For example, Myka cut his hair and he did not want that done. You could hear her laughing about him screaming. Toddlers don't have the verbal ability to express what they are feeling by virtue of not having a vocabulary. Add non-verbal autism on top of that, and you have the perfect storm. One of the things people don't understand about low-functioning autism is that they understand things. Throughout my work, I have been around non-verbal autistic people who can read and write. Her laughing about his screaming would have reinforced his perception that he wasn't being heard, so what could he do? Scream louder and more often. She said that he had behaviours, aka meltdowns and tantrums, almost daily. I wonder why. Now, I am not saying parents who have autistic kids with screaming behaviours are abusive parents. That is not in any way what I am saying. Autism is a very individualized disorder. Some autistic people scream as a stimming behavior, which is what they do to self-soothe. Some autistic people hate being touched, and doing so will cause them to go into extreme distress, which will cause them to scream. People who cannot verbalize will scream if something is making them uncomfortable. It might be as simple as a tag making them itch. There's a variety of reasons why they scream, which can be very distressing for the people around them, but does not mean they are being abused. However, I think this little boy was having daily screaming behaviours because they just didn't listen to him. They didn't affirm his pain. In Rachel's video, she showed a screenshot of this little boy with duct tape around his thumb to stop him from sucking on it. By removing an opportunity for him to self-soothe, he'd have to do something else, which may have actually been screaming. If they didn't supply enough sensory items such as soft, prickly or squishy toys, that also could have caused issues with his behaviours. A lot of autistic people like holding things they can play with because it's calming. Stimming can be very important to autistic people, young and old. Again, I have not done any research on this little boy and his parents, so I am not suggesting they haven't given him sensory toys. But if they hadn't, I would be horrified. It is such a basic and common thing with people who have autism. Another thing that is common with autism is rituals. I knew a guy who wasn't diagnosed with autism, but constantly joked about it because he had textbook symptoms. One of the things he used to do was smell a banana before he peeled it. If this little boy was being prevented from doing his rituals, as is often suggested by some people, that could cause distress. Some people have advocated for stopping stimming behaviours, which is extremely distressing for the person and can be considered as abusive. By the way, I cannot talk about autism without briefly mentioning an organisation called Autism Speaks. They want to cure autism, which as a genetic disorder that affects neurodevelopment is pretty impossible. They also want to make a test for autism similar to the one for Down syndrome, so parents will know before their child is born if they have autism. This has led autism activists to call Autism Speaks a hate group because they view this company as attempting to eradicate autism. Another thing that Rachel's video mentions is Myka's husband James videoed himself explaining why he put his adopted son to bed before the rest of his siblings. The reason was they wanted their older children to have some quality time with their parents because his son took up a lot of their time. Rachel said that what they were doing was wrong as it was isolating him from the rest of the family. I do agree with her, but I will defend them somewhat. I'm going to assume they've involved him in other aspects of family life. Again, I have no idea who these people are, so I could be totally wrong, but let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. A reminder, this is my experience talking to people who have adult siblings with disabilities. Often, when there is a kid who has an obvious disability, a lot more time and effort goes into their care and maintenance at the expense of their siblings. I have met several people who were diagnosed with disorders later in life because they weren't picked up by their parents as children, and this is due to the emphasis on their sibling. This is especially common with genetic disorders such as autism. Often, their psychological health takes a back seat despite the high likelihood of being bullied at school for having a sibling with a disability. Siblings of people with a disability also get used as maids or babysitters because their parents just can't cope. Their schooling can be disrupted. I do think the boy's parents did the responsible thing by giving his siblings some me time with their parents, even though it did exclude their son. Unfortunately, there's no right answer to that problem. Not to mention, the little boy may have been exhausted from screaming all day because his parents didn't listen to him. Any parent can tell you that a tired toddler is a nightmare, autism or no. Another thing that concerned me is that Myka kept mentioning God. I think a lot of well-meaning things happen in the name of the Christian God and end up being genuinely harmful, and I think this is a perfect example of it. I have so many questions. How quickly did they take him to a professional? Was it immediately? 2 months? 6 months? A year? A pattern of abusive behaviour can get set up within weeks of introducing the child to a household. If they started getting help after they realised they weren't coping, it was way too late. Again, this is based on absolutely nothing, and there is a huge possibility that I am wrong. Please assume that I am, but I would hazard a guess that their initial professional advice was from well-meaning yet woefully incorrect people at church with zero professional training. Unfortunately, Christian mums often rely on church groups and Christian advice rather than science-based medical advice. They often ask for faith healing over professional advice. As we have all learned in the past 6 months, because 2020 sucks, praying doesn't do shit. Once they had adopted their son and found out that he had extra disabilities, how much research did they do on those disorders? How much research did they do before adopting him? Did they end up going to a pediatrician for expert advice as soon as these new disorders became apparent? Were they proactive? Did they give themselves an opportunity to process what they were learning? Did they receive training around his disabilities? Were they given access to support networks that they needed? Did they have access to respite services such as specialised caseworkers, government funding, support groups, and family and friends helping out? If they did they utilise them correctly? Were they taught how to utilise them? Who were the people surrounding them? Were they certified to give advice? Was their advice based on theology over science? I have so many questions. Another thing I want to talk about is the hole this couple have dug for themselves. They made out that their lives were so perfect, so peaceful, so successful, and so wonderful. Their house is spotless, the kids are well behaved, they wanted to show off how wonderful they are for adopting a child with a disability from another country. Their whole public lives showed a lifestyle of sunshine and lollipops. When they started to fail in their personal lives, which is completely okay, they had backed themselves into a corner and they couldn't publicly ask for help because their facade would have collapsed. They even kept it up when they did the reverse adoption video. They sat on a neat bed with perfect sheets when while she bawled her eyes out, her hair was perfect. Everything was about them and their image, not about their kid. Everyone knows that what they see online is a sliver of what life is really like for the person who is projecting themselves. And it's always the best part of their lives. I mean, you probably think I have the neatest house on the planet. I don't. Trust me. I'm happy to talk about the things that are bothering me, but I won't talk too much about the more personal stuff or things that will dox me. But if you've built your entire online life on a lie of perfection to maintain this lie, people will get hurt. And now these people have traumatized a little boy with a disability again after traumatizing him by taking him out of his country and back to America. Their kids are probably going through a grieving process too, but it is all about the parents. Their actions are reprehensible, not just for the obvious trauma of rehoming a kid, but the lies they spun to their audience, their selfishness, the financial exploitation of their children, the financial exploitation of their audience, the doxing of the boy's medical issues, all of it. However, that little boy is apparently now in the care of a new family, which apparently is a much better training than these two. Because, let's be honest, knowingly taking on a child with a disability requires training. While this is an absolute shit show, I kind of want to tangentially talk a little bit about how we interact with people who have a disability. First, I want to explain some of the jargon that you will be hearing. A lot of people will say this is politically correct bullshit, but please remember, this politically correct bullshit is the reason why we don't call people with developmental disorders subhuman, which they did in the 1950s. You might have noticed that I used the term person with a disability rather than disabled person. The reason why I do that is because if you use the term disabled person, it puts the emphasis on the fact that this person has a disability rather than this is a person who has a disability. It's the same if you use the term cancer patient rather than patient with cancer. A person is not their disease, nor is a person their disability. This is the preferred term used in the industry now, but you will occasionally see disabled person. The term behaviour is used in Australia for what would normally be described as maybe a meltdown, but it can encompass other things. We call it a behaviour because it is demeaning to adults if we call it a tantrum. It infantilizes them. It also provides a larger umbrella to the term as a behaviour isn't necessarily a screaming episode or bursts of emotion. It describes disruptive or unusual behaviour. Things like running away, aka absconding, locking themselves in their room for hours when they are normally a friendly person, unusual eating behaviour, getting drunk, theft, etc. Usually these things are caused by external factors and not the disability of the person themselves. And if it is, we document them to ensure they aren't undergoing a medical condition they can't explain to us. Frequent behaviours can be traced back to something such as a staff member that is abusing people. If they were considered tantrums and ignored, they don't get the protection they need. Recognizing that a behaviour is actually caused by an external stimulus encourages us to treat them as if they are human. And trust me, when you treat someone like a human, they are generally more likely to be willing to work with you. Also, I describe myself as a disability support worker rather than a carer. The reason why I'm a support worker is because I'm there to support them in their daily lives, not care for them. They aren't sick, they have a disability. The idea with this new paradigm shift is to not only give people with disabilities more choice, but more responsibilities. Depending on their disability, they are encouraged to do as much as they can, such as cleaning, hygiene, etc. You are there to support them in doing that, such as prompting them or helping them make plans. You are not there to do everything for them, which is what is implied as a carer. However, there will be some people who describe themselves as a carer, which is perfectly fine. So how do we interact with people who have a disability? When you're wandering around and you see someone who has an obvious disability, what do? Smile, nod, and keep going. Maybe say hi as you walk past. Do not stare at them. If you're waiting in line for a coffee, start a conversation, or don't, it's up to you. I generally do because I want to do something to pass the time, which I would do to anyone, disability or no. If you're a waiter and you are serving them and they have a support worker with them, direct any questions you may have to the person, such as what they would like, not the support worker. Even if you think they won't be able to respond, ask them anyway. If they are nonverbal or their disability won't allow them to answer, the support worker will tell you what they would like. Their support worker is not an extension of them. People with a disability do appreciate it when they get asked what they would like. I can't tell you how many times I've had to direct a waiter to ask my client what they want. Trust me, I'm not blaming the waiters or service staff members, as it's a completely understandable thing, and it's not something you would generally think about. And that's the same with shopping or any form of social interaction. A lot of people who have a disability are able to articulate what they want really well. If you are a parent and your 4-year-old kid inevitably asks about why someone is in a wheelchair, don't hush them and tell them it's rude to ask and stare. Engage with the person. The question doesn't come from a place of malice, and telling the kid they're being rude just isolates the person even more. One of the biggest reasons why we see such discrimination against people with disabilities is because they were invisible for so many years. Your kid might not remember the interaction, but you will. And trust me, it's adorable and makes their day. Don't help them without their express permission. Do not push them if they are in a wheelchair. Do not randomly start feeding them if they are struggling. Do not randomly pick up their shopping for them. Do not touch their mobility aids. Do not help them at all unless you ask them for permission first. I cannot believe I have to say this, but it does happen. This hasn't happened to me personally, clearly, because I'm me, but I do know of some people who have had this happen to them. It is well-intentioned, but it is fucking rude. Be nice to their support worker. I'm not just saying that just for me, but for them as well. When you hang out with someone several hours a week for months or years on end, you begin to care about them. I've had people be really rude to me, and that's upset my client. And vice versa. Don't be rude or impatient with the person who has the disability. It can make the support worker really upset. On the flip side, being really nice annoys me. I mean, like smarmy levels of nice. It is fake and disrespectful. If they don't have an intellectual disability, they'll notice it too. It's kind of weird. People look at people in a wheelchair and immediately assume they have an intellectual disability. Often they do, but there is a large chunk of people who don't. I can think of about 3 people off the top of my head that I've supported in a wheelchair that don't have an intellectual disability. Being condescending to them is just not okay. I mean, it wouldn't be okay if they had an intellectual disability either. Just because you think they can't understand it, it doesn't mean that it can't hurt. And often they do understand it. Basically, what I'm saying is this. If someone has a disability, talk to them and interact with them like they don't have one. That's basically the rule. Depending on the disability, they might need you to be extra vigilant in regards of being taken advantage of. I have a client that constantly threatens to buy me coffee. It's a nice sentiment, but it could be taken advantage of by an unscrupulous person. If he has a freebie, I'll accept that, but that's as far as I'd go, and that's acceptable under the guidelines of my work. Some people don't have a physical disability and can be quite attractive, which opens them up for sexual assault, especially if they go out nightclubbing. Also, if you start a friendship with a person who has a disability and you start to get romantic feelings towards them, make sure you understand your responsibilities in your local area of the law. For example, if they have an intellectual disability and you do not, you may be breaking the law. In Australia, if you have an IQ above 70 and they have an IQ below 70, that is considered rape. That is because it is considered they don't have informed consent regardless of age. In America, this classification is legally called vulnerable adult and have the same legal protections as children. If both parties are below 70, it is not considered to be rape. I do think they allow a little bit of leeway, so if one party has an IQ of 71 and the other has an IQ of 69, it is considered to be okay. But if it's a larger gap, such as an IQ of 67 and an IQ of 100, which is considered to be average, that is considered sexual assault. And trust me, people with an IQ of 70 can be pretty gluey. Sorry about this rant, I just needed to get this off my chest. I've linked a few videos below, such as Rachel's, one by an adoptee, and one by a person who has a degree in social services where she says they could be lying about the professionals saying they should rehome him. I am truly heartbroken for this whole situation. I do think people who put their kids on the internet who aren't child actors are frankly despicable people, especially if they're earning lots of money from them. Please stay safe, everyone, and don't forget, don't give yourself the raw prawn. I just want to say a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons, especially my $10 Redback Spider patrons, Ada Furball, Mary Civitano, Amanda Vogue, Atheist Pastor, Lauren Hart, and Ross Devereux. I also want to say a very special thank you to my $35 Era Candy patron, Osman Cometh. I hope I've helped you understand a little bit more about disabilities, and if you've got any questions about how best to interact with people with a disability, because it's pretty scary, please send me a message on Twitter.